This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the hour, we will go through the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But first, a quick run through the equity markets that we do track here on the program. The NSE 20 in Kenya still languishing in the mid-1800s. It's fallen by over 30% so far this year. But at the price multiples we're seeing on some counters, trading activity has absolutely surged. Equity turnover up nearly 12% in the year to date at about $1.07 billion so far. The JSE All Share fell by nearly 2% today ahead of South Africa's rate-setting decision. We'll cover that a little later in the hour. The index has risen by just over 1% so far in Q3. American tech stocks, on the other hand, resumed their slide in early trading at 15:11 GMT. Facebook nearly 2% lower, Apple down by 0.8%, Tesla 2.7% in the red, and Amazon over 2% lower. Those are your markets. Here's what's coming up tonight. South Sudan's president fires his 8th finance minister amidst an economic meltdown. South Africa's central bank pauses its rate-cutting cycle as the economy reopens and COVID-19 restrictions are gradually lifted. And the UK Prime Minister says he has every hope of avoiding a no-deal Brexit. Got a bit to get through tonight, but let's start in South Sudan, where President Salva Kiir has fired the country's finance minister. Salvatore Garang Mabiordit is now the 8th finance minister to be dismissed by Mr. Kiir since the country gained independence back in 2011. He is replaced by Athian Ding Athiang. Kiir has also fired the head of the Revenue Authority and the director of the Nile Petroleum Corporation. That's essentially the country's state oil firm. South Sudan, remember, is emerging from a civil war that has shattered its economy, and that economy is almost wholly dependent on revenue from the sale of oil. At its peak, oil production in South Sudan was about 350,000 barrels a day. Since the signing of a peace deal back in 2018, production has gradually risen back up to about 170,000 barrels a day. Oil prices, however, have fallen by at least 30% so far this year, and that has severely restricted the revenues available to run public services in Africa's youngest country. Now, South Sudan's singular dependence on oil in order to fund virtually all government operations and provide foreign currency earnings is partly to blame for the current economic meltdown. Just last month, the central bank admitted it had completely run out of foreign currency reserves and it could no longer limit the depreciation of the South Sudanese pound. Here's CGTN's Patrick Hewitt with the details of this unfolding crisis.
South Sudan is facing the worst economic crisis since independence. The local currency is depreciating daily against the dollar, and the Central Bank of South Sudan says its reserves are depleted due to years of civil war and the impact of the coronavirus. Many Juba residents say they are now unable to afford basic goods.
This economic crisis is increasing, and I believe that it is going to worsen the situations. I don't know what kind of this country is going to be in this coming days. So we as citizens, we are demanding the government to take measures in this time so that we control the economy.
It's not easy these days. Everything has gone high. The rate of the dollar has increased, and it affects also the school.
President Salva Kiir has set up a committee headed by one of the 5 vice presidents, James Wani-Iga, to come up with measures to arrest the deteriorating situation. One of the recommendations from the committee is a total overhaul of some government's revenue-generating institutions, such as the National Revenue Authority and Customs. President Kiir has now replaced the finance minister, the head of the country's revenue authority, and the head of the oil company, Nile Petroleum. South Sudan depends on oil money to fund 98% of its budget, but the pandemic has led to a fall in global oil prices. The government says it is now focusing on bringing in revenue from other sources like taxation.
We have found out that a lot of exemptions have been issued, and the money that we are losing in the process is more than what we collect. So we have today resolved that we are going to do thorough investigation and examination of the same.
The Central Bank of South Sudan says it is working on measures to try and address the issue of inflation. The bank is threatening to ban the use of dollars in the country, but that would be a huge challenge because many South Sudanese businesses import goods and require dollars to do so. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Let's dig a little deep into that story. Patrick Oyeta joins us, of course, from the capital of South Sudan tonight. Patrick, has the presidency provided any more detailed explanation on why all these people are fired? The finance minister, the acting head of the National Revenue Authority, and the head of the Nile Petroleum Corporation as well.
Rama, there has been no explanation yet from the presidency on why those officials have been fired. However, the committee which is tasked with coming up with measures to ensure that the economy is stabilized has been actually meeting with these officials to find out how they have been operating. And as also usual, when the president fires people, he doesn't really give reasons. And sometimes when they are fired in a very difficult time like this, when the economy is not doing well, people may suspect that something may be wrong is what they have done. But we have also seen in a surprise move, sometimes some of these officials are returned to the same ministry or at least given some other ministry. So it's very difficult to say whether they are fired because things are very difficult now and the president is looking for another solution, or there is any other reason other than that, you know.
Indeed. Last week, though, the finance minister said he just didn't have the funds to pay civil servant salaries. And those civil servants, we understand, haven't been paid since April. I mean, walk us through how government services have been affected by this crippling funding shortage.
Yeah, the government services have actually been crippled. That is true. Workers are not paid salaries. Some of the teachers, of course, because of COVID-19, they are also at home. They are not teaching. They are not getting salaries. Some of them are now getting other jobs in the private sector. Some of them are struggling, of course, to feed their families. So really, services are not being offered now in most of the institutions because people do not have the motivation even to work. You work and you don't get salary. So things are really tough at the time when prices are going up, the local currency is depreciating, and prices in the market is very high. So it is really, really very difficult to make ends meet. So many civil servants are really finding it very difficult here in South Sudan.
There's a bit more nuance to this question, but a lot of people watching this will say, look, but South Sudan is an oil producer. Its oil output is around 170,000 barrels a day. Even with oil prices at around $40 a barrel, where's the revenue from the country's oil exports? Where's that revenue going?
Yes, you are right. Even though the price of oil has fallen, money is still coming in. Of course, according to the Ministry of Finance, actually, they are getting about $30 million a month. The challenge, however, is in the peace agreement, the peace deal implementation. They are saying that a lot of this money is going into funding the peace process because the peace deal has brought in a huge government. You have 5 vice presidents. You have the security sector that needs to be reformed. You have these soldiers who are in the cantonment sites. They need to be trained. They need food. They need medicine. Lots of things. You have 35 ministers. You have 10 deputy ministers. You have 10 governors. And you are expected to have 550 members of parliament. So they are saying that the money is actually going majorly to fund the peace process. Therefore, leaving actually the Ministry of Finance with nothing to do about other civil servants. And also at the time when getting loans from other countries or other financial institutions, international financial institutions, is very difficult because those financial institutions would like to see transparency from the government of South Sudan, which at the moment, unfortunately, is not forthcoming.
Indeed, but the other angle to this story is that South Sudan had agreed to pay Sudan roughly $24 a barrel as transit costs and processing fees for every barrel of crude that it does export. So that might be part of the problem. Have these fees been renegotiated given where oil prices are at the moment? And if so, what are the new terms?
Yeah, there have been some forms of negotiations in regard to the fee that South Sudan is to pay to Khartoum. Of course, many people have said it was a mistake that they agreed to pay $24 per barrel because if it was percentage, it would be good because if the price of oil falls, it could always be manageable. And this situation is very difficult. There have been negotiations, but they have not yet reached an agreement to reduce on the fees that the South Sudan pays to Sudan because of course of turbulence also in the Sudan, where the economic situation itself is very difficult. Also, they are also struggling. Number two, there have been changes in this government of overthrow of former President Omar al-Bashir, a new government coming in. So there are changes of officials, and sometimes continuity becomes a problem. So they have not yet really moved ahead to reduce on the fee that South Sudan pays to Sudan.
Indeed. Patrick Oyet there in Juba with the details on the economic meltdown in Africa's youngest state. Now, speaking of oil, OPEC and its allies, led by Russia, held a virtual meeting on the 17th of September to review market conditions and discuss compliance with deep production cuts. Now, internal forecasts within the group are warning that a rise in COVID-19 cases around the world may essentially curb oil demand and slow down the pace of economic recovery. A technical OPEC Plus panel is unlikely to recommend changes from the current output cuts target of 7.7 million barrels of crude a day. But there was pressure at today's meeting for much tighter compliance with agreed-to production cuts. Iraq, Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates under a fair bit of pressure to cut output in order to compensate for overproduction. All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start with the South African retailer Woolworths. It has received several non-binding offers for its remaining Australian David Jones properties. This comes as it reports a 65% slump in annual earnings. Its headline earnings per share was within previous guidance, falling by over 65% to 119.8 cents a share from 342.9 cents a share a year earlier. Woolies is attributing the decline to the temporary closure of most of its non-food stores due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Over in East Africa, Coca-Cola has failed to reach an out-of-court settlement with 58 people in Kenya who say they fell ill after taking contaminated beverages made by the firm. Now, the beverages in question were allegedly sold between October 2013 and January 2014. This long-running legal tussle will now have to be adjudicated by a high court. The applicants had initially demanded to be paid $1,000 and they filed a suit on that matter in court. They rejected a proposed compensation of $400 each. Up in North Africa, IKEA has announced plans to open a new megastore in Egypt by March 2021. The Swedish home furniture giant has also launched its 2020-2021 online catalogue for the first time in the North African nation. The catalogue has some interesting price reductions on more than 1,000 different products for the North African state. And finally, Uber is planning to sell part of its $6.3 billion stake in China's Didi Chuxing in order to raise cash. Back in April, Uber said it expects an impairment charge of at least $2.2 billion against the carrying value of some of the company's minority equity investments due to the impact of the pandemic. The San Francisco-based ride-hailing pioneer holds 37% in Russia's Yandex Taxi and about 18% of Singapore-based Grab. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Plenty more content coming up, including this. South Africa's central bank pauses its rate-cutting cycle as the economy reopens and pandemic restrictions ease. And in a bid to widen its tax base, Ugandan authorities are now going after bloggers. We'll have the details next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay.
beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how whole stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, as most market commentators and economists had anticipated, South Africa's Monetary Policy Committee has decided to keep the repo rate essentially where it was, at 3.5%. The decision was announced by the central bank governor, and it follows the bank's three-day meeting in Pretoria. Now, that essentially means that the prime commercial lending rate remains at more than a 40-year low of 7%. This is part of the broader economic response to the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. The central bank had already cut the rate at which it lends money to commercial banks by 300 basis points since the start of the year. The move to hold the repo rate exactly where it was this time round also comes just today after the country's president announced that South Africa would gradually ease its COVID-19 restrictions to level 1 over the next month. Quite a bit to get through on this policy decision. Let's examine it in a bit more detail. Sumitra Naidu is live from Johannesburg with more data on this. Sumitra, the repo rate is at 3.5%. That's barely above headline inflation. Prime lending rate at levels not seen in around 40 years. Realistically, was there more room for the central bank to cut rates?
You know, Ramah, the response on this was a little bit mixed. Most economists thought that there would be one more cut, at least of 25 basis points. There were only a few that thought that, you know, in terms of what the Reserve Bank usually does and, you know, it's really cautious, that they would hold. Of course, you know, some economists feel that there is still some room for rate cuts, but the Reserve Bank felt that inflation is in check. The rand has regained some of its losses and is stabilizing. And with the economy reopening, the MPC needed to take a more cautious approach and hold rates unchanged. The bank also expects oil prices to remain low and local food price inflation to remain contained. The repo rate is at 3.5%. It's a historical low. Now, the issue here is that if you go too low, then you also don't attract enough investment because the yield is weak. At this stage, the bank is giving us the sense that they've done all they can to help South Africans and the economy, but they now also need to start looking at drawing some international investment with the economy reopening. The bank also noted that there would be no more cuts this year and that the outlook includes 2 rate hikes next year.
Indeed. Two members of the Monetary Policy Committee, of course, also didn't want to leave the repo rate unchanged. I believe the argument they were making was for a 25 basis point cut. As you mentioned, what was their argument in these deliberations?
Yes, that's right. 2 of the members wanted a 25 basis point cut. They obviously were of the view that there was still room for lower rates. We have to remember that the South African economy has been severely affected by the lockdown. Hundreds of businesses have closed down completely. Some agencies estimate over 1.7 million job losses. People are struggling to get by, and the rate cuts are seen as a measure to ease the burden, especially on households. But according to the Reserve Bank, monetary policy has actually done quite a bit to help to ease the financial conditions in the country and have also helped to improve the resilience of households. Again, you know, the governor reiterated the need for structural reforms. This is something he says at every MPC meeting. And he noted that monetary policy wasn't the only answer to lifting growth in the country. It says it cannot, you know, the bank says that they cannot work by themselves. A lot more needs to be done by government.
Indeed. The forecasts, though, are pretty grim for 2020. The central bank revising its forecast for contraction higher to 8.2%. The OECD, even more extreme, they're forecasting a contraction of over 11% this year. So other than services and tourism, what other parts of South Africa's economy are likely to be hit hardest?
Well, we still have some sectors of this economy that haven't reopened. Even now, as we enter level 1 on Sunday at midnight, you have things like entertainment that's still going to be closed. But, I think the two biggest sectors are really mining and manufacturing. We saw in the second quarter GDP how badly these two sectors were affected. Manufacturing fell 75%. Now, that was largely as a result of the lockdown. But going forward, as the economy reopens, we still have an electricity supply problem. And the governor warned about this today. He said while there were no demand-side pressures evident at this stage, electricity and other administered prices remain a concern. With industries having lost 3 to 5 months of activity, making any investments at this stage is going to be tough, let alone getting back to normal. We're seeing the same situation with mining. And of course, COVID has really impacted the mining sector, with miners returning to work and contracting the virus. So a lot of them are put on downtime. So you have these sectors as well: transport, aviation. These are sectors as well that will be severely affected still going forward with this economy opening. And as I said, with entertainment still hasn't been open. You have, and entertainment also is a considerable contributor to GDP in this country. It is very big. I mean, we saw that with the restaurant industry as well, how badly they were hit until they started opening up slowly. You have bigger entertainment industries, conference venues and things like that, that still haven't reopened fully.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg. Thank you. Now, the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, as Sumitra mentioned there, has announced that the country would essentially move to its level 1 of pandemic restrictions. Now, these will take effect from midnight on Sunday, nearly 6 months after the pandemic first landed in South Africa. CGTN's Angela Coppola has the details.
Ramaphosa reminded South Africans that more than 15,000 people had died and over 65,000 had been infected in that time. But since the July peak, the situation had improved, although the economic position had gotten worse, leading to a 16% GDP contraction in the second quarter.
Just as we have acted together to defeat this virus, we must roll up our sleeves and get to work rebuilding our economy. We have a mammoth task ahead of us.
The President confirmed that an economic plan was in the pipeline, with the Cabinet due to ratify it in the coming weeks.
What worries me in hearing about a new plan is that we've had lots of plans in the past, and those plans have consistently fallen short of promise, and in recent years that difference between promise and delivery has got wider and wider.
As the country prepares for the new normal, there was also good news for the international tourism sector.
We will be allowing travel into and out of South Africa for business, leisure and other travel with effect from the 1st of October 2020. This is subject to various containment and mitigation measures. Travel may be restricted to and from certain countries that have high infection rates. A list of those countries will be published, and it will be based on the latest scientific data that we will be able to get.
We're cautiously optimistic because we do know that there's a lot of detail that still has to come out. And so therefore, one of the things that we're looking for is we know that the individual ministers will be making presentations and will be issuing directions to support the level 1. So an important aspect for us is to determine what is on the list in terms of the states that are going to be allowed to fly in here. And I think reciprocally as well, they've also got to be wanting to accept us as South Africans flying into their part of the world.
But analysts say implementation of such plans is crucial if South Africa is to forge ahead during these difficult times.
South Africa sits structurally stuck, and one of those structural constraints is an absence of confidence and an absence of delivery in policy promise. Both of those capabilities sit in the hands of the policymakers.
The President has called for South Africans to roll up their sleeves because we need to get that economy kick-started again. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to East Africa now. Online bloggers in Uganda worry that they could soon be shut down with new regulations that essentially require them to pay a fee in order to operate in the country. So starting from next month, bloggers will be required to pay an annual fee of roughly $30 a year. Now, campaigners say this is the latest blow in efforts to suppress media freedom. Local fiscal authorities view it differently. They say this move is aimed at widening the country's tax base. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports from Kampala.
You sent her a link?
Yes.
Rosebel Kagumire is a social media blogger. She uses her platform to defend women's rights. But Kagumire is concerned that the new regulation and the payment she would have to make could curtail her freedom of expression.
When someone attacks your very right to live a dignified life and earn a living and be able to wake up every morning and function, I think we cannot take these kind of moves, directives lightly.
But the Uganda Communications Commission, a government body with the mandate to regulate the media, says it wants to raise domestic revenue.
If somebody goes in the space of gathering information, this information could be paid for, it could be sponsored, it could be carrying advertising, it could be for subscription, and this information is for simultaneous reception by the public. Now you've entered into the business of broadcasting. You need to be known by the regulator. You need to know your obligations. You need to know the standards. You need to know the rules of the game.
The new regulation begins on the 5th of October. Critics argue that the regulation will actually result in double taxation for internet users because people already pay taxes on data usage. The regulation comes into force ahead of next year's presidential poll.
Now that we're in a political season, we can also see people who are flocking to us wanting authorization because they want to cash in on the virtual campaigns so that they can be able to push content for politicians, which is fantastic. And we're saying this can actually be done successfully but well regulated.
The changes are part of sweeping internet regulations introduced by the government in 2018, including a social media tax. Online experts are concerned that the new law could be used to stifle freedoms of expression.
I don't think so that they're looking for money, no. That's out. What I think, they are looking for those few social media influencers who trade in falsehoods.
Uganda has one of the lowest internet penetration at 14%. And for now, social media bloggers like Kagumire will keep pushing for increased usage of the internet space. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to North Africa now. Sales of personal computers in Egypt rose by 15% in the first half of the year, boosted by lockdown measures that have seen a majority of employees being compelled to work remotely. Egypt, as you might recall, imposed a nationwide curfew in late March, effectively shutting down schools and airports in order to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. From Cairo, CGTN's Yasser Hakim picks up the story.
School teacher Dalia Khairi, and who is also a mother of 2 young sons, has had to contend with working from home since April, following the lockdown measures imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19.
mainly بدأ معانا من أول كورونا فعلا الأونلاين.
I started working from home after the pandemic hit the country and my son had to study from home. There are positive aspects to this since you don't waste time in traffic jams, transportation, and going up and down and so on. The negative is that you miss socialization and are glued in front of the device all day.
Dalia had 1 PC for the family, but after the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, she had to buy 2 more computers for her boys to do their homework on time. She says many families, including the low-income ones, had to do the same. And this has had a positive impact on PC sales in the North African nation. According to data released by the Federation of Egyptian Chambers of Commerce, PC sales increased by between 10 to 15% during the first half of the year.
It's true, demand for tablets and PCs has increased, though tablets has seen more sales. That's because the students are conducting their studies online and the elderly are working from home.
Working from home is comfortable and minimizes the spread of the virus. But would Dalia continue with this arrangement after the pandemic has been contained?
We will definitely go out. I love having a social life and meeting people, as well as going back to work. It shapes the personality of human beings, including children.
On the streets of the capital, Cairo, crowds have noticeably increased, reflecting Dalia's opinion, despite the existence of the dangers still posed by the virus. And that could also have an impact on PC sales during the last 4 months of the year. But for now, 2020 is turning out to be a good year for computer sales in the country. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for another break. Here's what's coming up. The UK Prime Minister says he has every hope of avoiding a no-deal Brexit. And we'll explore the latest developments in China and Russia's push towards de-dollarization. This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 48 hours of rain.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
Remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back to the program. At about 18:30 GMT, these are the stories making your headlines at this hour. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced the country will move to its level 1 pandemic restrictions. The eased restrictions will take effect from midnight on the 20th of September, nearly 6 months after the pandemic first landed on South African shores. In North Africa, the head of Libya's UN-recognized Government of National Accord, Fayez al-Sarraj, has announced his willingness to resign by the end of October. This development follows the recent agreement between various Libyan factions to have an 18-month-long transition period, and that's expected to lead on to general elections. In South Sudan, heavy rainfall has affected almost 500,000 people in the central part of the country. According to the United Nations mission in the country, flooding in the River Nile has also devastated other regions as well. The Commission says that the lakes and Jonglei states have been the worst affected. Heavy rains often cause rivers to overflow and break their banks in South Sudan, causing enormous flooding in vast areas and urban settlements. And finally, Côte d'Ivoire's former Prime Minister Guillaume Soro says that the opposition must unite in stopping President Alassane Ouattara from winning a third term in office. Speaking while in exile in France, Mr. Soro says that the October polls, in his view, are a civilian coup d'etat. As the country's constitution says, presidents cannot be in office for more than 2 terms. The Ivorian incumbent, Alassane Ouattara, however, argues that a change in the constitution in 2016 reset his term and allows him to run again. That's a run through your headlines. And the latest attempt to ramp up the Brexit drama as the deadline to reach an agreement comes ever closer, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he has every hope of avoiding a no-deal exit with the EU. Johnson, however, has refused completely to back down on controversial new legislation that he openly admits will break international law. Now, the proposed law essentially overrides parts of the Brexit treaty relating to trade with Northern Ireland, and it could torpedo already fragile fought talks on trade with the EU. The UK, as you might recall, formally left the bloc back in January, having thrashed out a withdrawal agreement back in 2019. That technical departure marked the beginning of a transition period as the two sides worked out the framework of a free trade agreement for once that transition expires at the end of 2020.
So why did the Northern Ireland Secretary tell the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee that in his opinion the EU is negotiating in good faith?
Well, it is always possible that
Which is
it is always possible that I am mistaken, and perhaps they will, perhaps they will prove my suspicions wrong.
From one Prime Minister to another, Yoshihide Suga has started executing his duties on his first day in office as Japan's newly elected Prime Minister. Suga was formally elected earlier this week on Wednesday to replace Shinzo Abe, who announced last month that he planned to step down due to ill health. Now, while the 71-year-old won the backing of fellow ruling party lawmakers with a pledge to carry on Mr. Abe's policies and work on unfinished goals, he is also pushing for some policy changes of his own. Suga has vowed to discontinue cherry blossom viewing parties. The events have been condemned as a controversial use of taxpayers' money. He has also pledged to contain Japan's coronavirus outbreak and revive the economy. China and Russia used the US dollar for less than half of their bilateral trade for the first time this year. It's part of a broader concerted effort to reduce dependence on the American currency and move towards using either the ruble or the yuan or the euro. The de-dollarization matter was on the agenda during the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Moscow last week. Julia Chapman filed this report.
Before the pandemic, trade between China and Russia was at an all-time high. As restrictions ease and turnover starts to recover, the two countries are refocusing on a mutual goal, using their own currencies instead of the US dollar.
A plan is being prepared to fulfill the development strategy of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization by 2025. As part of that, there are concrete steps in the spheres of politics, security and humanitarian links. Important documents are being prepared in the sphere of economic cooperation and also a roadmap for the gradual move towards mutual trade in national currencies.
For decades, world trade has been dominated by the dollar, one of the most stable currencies. Countries keep reserves of the greenback to buy international goods. But as ties with Washington continue to be strained, Beijing and Moscow are diversifying.
China and Russia's move away from the dollar is largely symbolic, but there are practical considerations too. Using the ruble, yuan or euro allows countries to sidestep US sanctions, a concern becoming as important for China as it is for Russia.
A growing number of Russian firms are avoiding the dollar in their transactions. And Russia's central bank has slashed its dollar holdings in recent years. But using other currencies has its risks, as their value can fluctuate significantly.
This story has political grounds because in general, so far, trade in US dollars is trade with the least losses. Trading in rubles, yuan, the euro incurs certain increased costs, but the countries are doing this to avoid system risks arising.
The so-called de-dollarization project underscores a growing partnership between China and Russia. Despite coronavirus-related setbacks, a goal of $200 billion in annual trade still stands. But that trade may not be denominated in dollars. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
Now, to say that this year has been a tough one for the global auto industry would be quite the understatement. And China, frankly, is no exception either. As the world's largest car market gradually starts to recover, CGTN's Sun Tianwan explores how foreign car makers are restructuring.
China's auto market has seen positive growth for 5 months in a row after major setbacks in the first quarter due to the COVID-19 outbreak. According to official data, August sales reached over 2 million units. That's 11.6% more compared to last year's number. The industry's performance over recent months are promising signs for overseas companies, including BMW Brilliance Automotive, a Sino-German joint venture based in Shenyang.
We believe in the growth potential here in China, and in particular, the growth potential for high-quality cars. It's for us a logical consequence that we, of course, invest into a new product and new facilities here offering state-of-the-art technology into China.
This time, BBA is eyeing the new energy vehicle market. Despite the outbreak's impact, German carmaker BMW has expanded its business in Shenyang and decided to open another new battery center for its latest electric model, aimed at Chinese and global markets. The company says its expansion in Shenyang will help boost research and development and double the production of its fifth-generation high-voltage batteries. Work resumed on schedule even amid the outbreak, while safety of the associates has been guaranteed thanks to the support of local authorities.
So that's why we already started mid of February with our production, and since then more or less are on full capacity. At the moment we are producing more than 60,000 cars every month.
With the launch of the new center in Shenyang, BBA say they're ready to further tap into the electric vehicle market and lead the industry's development in China and the world. Sun Tianwan, CGTN, Shenyang.
Onto the console wars. Sony eagerly awaited PlayStation 5 will come to market in November, taking on the new offering by its bitter rival, the Xbox, as video game play has essentially boomed really during this pandemic. A streamed event showcasing the games tailored for PS5 ended with word that 2 versions of the console will come to the market in the middle of November in Australia, North America, New Zealand, Mexico, Japan and South Korea. The rest of us apparently will get this console a week later. Now, the premium PS5, the top end of the range, is going to be priced at $500, a digital-only edition, no Blu-ray drive in that one, essentially designed for the trend of games being downloaded from the cloud, will be priced at around $400. According to research firm NPD, more than $3.3 billion was spent in the US alone in the month of August, and that was on video game hardware, content and accessories.
Thank you all for joining us today and for being part of this amazing journey. It's your passion as fans of gaming that drives us to deliver a truly new generation of experiences on PS5. From everyone at PlayStation, we appreciate your continued support, and we look forward to you getting your hands on PS5 very soon.
Now, China is one of the largest markets in the world for green funding. The country's central bank aims to play a key role in China's transition to being a low-carbon economy and in promoting a green financial system. CGTN spoke to a policymaker from the People's Bank of China to explore how the country is leveraging green stimulus for a more environmentally friendly recovery.
Green finance is becoming the investment darling of the world. Wang Xin, the head of the Research Bureau of the People's Bank of China, recognized that China has emerged as a global leader in financing green and low-carbon projects.
In 2016, along with other government agencies, the PBC released the guidance for establishing green finance system, which was the blueprint of green finance development. Now China is at the top of the world in terms of green loans and green bonds, the market size of green loans and green bonds. As of the end of the first half of 2020, the outstanding of green loans and green bonds amounted to $11.1 trillion yuan and 1.2 trillion yuan, respectively.
The global oil markets took a massive hit as the result of coronavirus-induced lockdowns. The pandemic has provided an opportunity for economies to speed up their transition into a more energy-friendly future. A four-pillar system for green finance has been established in China. Wang suggested that top policymakers should take more targeted approaches when drafting the 14th five-year plan.
We suggest China set a clear carbon emission target during the 14th five-year plan period and supports a number of regions setting time-frame targets for peaking carbon emissions and net zero emissions. We need to support investments in such industries as green buildings, clean transportation, and renewable energy, and so on. We could raise funds for renewable energy development by issuing special government bonds, financial bonds, and corporate bonds.
The PBOC is set to review how banks are performing in green finance on a quarterly basis, starting from next year.
The new evaluation plan mainly makes adjustments in the following ways. First, it also includes the performance evaluation of green bonds. Secondly, the quantitative evaluation methods has been improved. Thirdly, the evaluation results can be used in central banks' rating of financial institutions. The PBC and related agencies have been encouraging pension funds, insurance funds, and other long-term investors to carry out green investments. We need to speed up the pension system reform, develop individual account-based pensions schemes, and encourage more pension funds to do ESG investing.
Tamara Ibrahimpour, CGTN.
Blockchain tech is increasingly being embraced not just by tech-dependent firms, but also by data-intensive sectors like trade and finance. CGTN's Ying Junyi explores what that means for you in What's Hot tonight.
The usual bottlenecks in international trade include prolonged procedures, multiple participants, and a lack of information transparency. They might not be an issue for traders in the future, however, because of some ideas from N-Chain, the blockchain developer from Alipay's Ant Group, which is set for a review Thursday by securities regulator for an IPO on the city's Nasdaq stock market. N-Chain's idea is to shorten trade transactions and also make them more reliable.
Demands for credit investigation are very high in international trade due to information asymmetry. We first launched a blockchain-based service on our global e-commerce platform and are now offering it to the public. Companies can also use it to track qualitative products and do more targeted marketing.
Shared public ledgers may also be able to improve cross-border financial transfers and provide solutions to many social and legal problems. For example, content creators could enforce their copyrights at low costs by using blockchain technology.
Using blockchains, content creators can register their copyrights easily. When infringements occur, the blockchain technology will help copyright holders find it and store evidence on blockchain-based platforms. Courts could review evidence directly on the platform.
Other industries are also looking into blockchain technology and setting up their own blockchains for industry insiders to use. One developer, Wanxiang Blockchain, is offering the technology to companies in areas including logistics and financial leasing, and says semi-private blockchains could in the future connect to one another. Companies in related businesses could use a blockchain together, running it as a consortium.
The inter-blockchain communication technology is like the internet. There would be a public blockchain which everyone can use, and companies could also join the blockchain for their own industry, like joining a local area network. The technology will let these semi-private blockchains communicate with one another.
Global market intelligence firm IDC estimates China's expenditure on blockchains will surpass $2 billion by 2023. Shanghai is set to issue the country's first local blockchain security standard to help spur development here. Ying Junyi, ICS for CGTN Shanghai.
Quick run through commodity prices for you. With a focus on oil this time round, as more and more economic uncertainty starts to creep into the macroeconomic picture, Saudi Arabia and Russia are calling for much tighter compliance with production cuts. Now, this push for greater compliance is aimed at a handful of states, namely Nigeria, the UAE and Iraq. IEA data, in fact, in the case of the UAE, made just 10% of the agreed to cut back in the month of August. It has a lot of ground to make up for. Brent was 2% higher at 15:01 GMT, $43.10 at that point in time. Here's what's coming up next. We'll take a look at the history of the kente cloth, one of Ghana's superb cultural exports.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. A local Ghanaian cloth, kente, has widely portrayed the country's pride and heritage for centuries. In the United States, it's long been worn by members of the African American community during important ceremonies like graduations. Back in June, you might recall the U.S. lawmakers wore kente cloth scarves as they looked to pass a bill on police reforms following the death of George Floyd, an African American national who died when a police officer knelt on his neck for several minutes. This led to an increase in interest in the cloth. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai tells us more about the kente significance and history.
Footwork and hand coordination, both vital ingredients in the making of the indigenous Ghanaian cloth, kente. Samuel Bampo has been weaving since he was a child. Now at the age 72, he still makes a living by producing these colorful cloths.
One cannot learn how to weave the kente within 6 months. It takes many years to perfect this craft. There are lots of designs and you need to keep them all in memory. We don't have the designs on paper to serve as reference.
The kente cloth is part of the heritage of the Ashanti people in Ghana and was initially worn only by royalty. Ordinary Ghanaians now wear it during special occasions like weddings. Each block, pattern and color has a distinct name and meaning.
We made this design in celebration of the love between Kwame Nkrumah and his wife Fatia. We named it Fatia Befits Nkrumah.
These strips of kente are joined together to make the full cloth.
Legend has it that a spider spinning a complex web inspired the earliest kente techniques and designs, and you can see why. A lot of precision and mind work is required to weave the cloth. One like this can take up to 2 days to make.
Weavers say they take 2 months or more to make 6 yards of the kente cloth. A full cloth can be sold for as much as $350, depending on its designs and colors.
We import all the threads we use for weaving the kente cloth. This makes it very expensive to produce. It could be less expensive if we're able to produce the threads locally.
The traditional weaving of kente cloth has existed since the 11th century in Ghana. It has defied any form of technological innovation. Samuel says Despite the advanced technology in cloth making, the handmade kente cloth should continue to be preserved to protect the Ghanaian heritage. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Let's finish the hour in London. The city has well and truly jumped onto the bandwagon of drive-in cinemas this summer. Some beloved outdoor cinemas have essentially roared back to life, but apparently nothing quite beats the newest experience to join the roster. It is a float-in cinema, quite literally. CGTN's Holly Hudson hopped on board one of the eco-boats in question for a closer look.
In some ways, it's the same. There's people eating popcorn, a big screen, a classic film. But there's one big difference. The majority of this audience are on boats.
Setting sail to watch a screening of Dirty Dancing isn't exactly the normal cinematic experience, but these aren't normal times. On the Regent's Canal here in central London, up to 100 moviegoers can float in, moor up and watch big stars like Patrick Swayze on the UK's biggest ever riverside screen, and they listen using noise-cancelling headphones.
In line with government guidance, groups of up to 6 people from different households can take to the water.
We're here to celebrate Maria's birthday, and Maria has parents that were shielding, so we were like, well, this is going to be the safest way to do it to Maria.
Just a comfortable way, I think, that we all feel safe as well, and we feel like we can still spend time together and make memories in such a unique way.
I went to the cinema recently to watch something with my partner, and it was just a bit odd to be in a cinema with masks on and everyone's separated. It's just a new way to be safe, but also it's a new way to watch the movie.
Cinemas across the UK were allowed to reopen in July with social distancing rules and face masks. Organisers here say they had no choice but to get creative.
Our revenue drops from March. Our revenue as a production company dropped by about 95%. So our industry has been hit really hard. So it's all about everyone now pivoting and coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things.
The float-in is just the latest cinematic venture in the capital. Lockdown has also led to a boom in drive-in events, 9 times as many as last year.
In terms of drive-ins, I think that trend will continue on into the winter months, purely because the weather isn't a massive factor with the drive-in cinema, because you can still stay in your car, and also if you have a convertible, put the roof up.
There are worries, though, that as winter approaches, outdoor events like this will not only be hit by worsening weather, but by a second wave of the virus. Holly Hudson, CGTN, London.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies as we close the programme. So you remember April, right? It feels like a lifetime ago, but April was when the rand hit over 19 to the dollar. It steadily clawed back some of those losses since then, however, and today that trend did continue with up about 0.1% against a greenback 16.23 at 15.35 GMT. And when it rains, it does pour fairly intensely at that for Africa's second biggest copper exporter. Zambia's currency, the kwacha, is on course to hit 20 to the dollar. It's weakened by 0.25% today to 19.95. That brings its year-to-date position to around 40% weaker against the dollar. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on this program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.